South Korea, Japan, the Netherlands. These are some of the countries with the best education systems in the world. You'll notice that the United States isn't in the top 3. In fact, we are nowhere near the top. For a developed country, our public education system screams inadequacy. Low standardized test scores and low literacy rates. Only 80% of adults in Louisiana are functionally literate. My family is hosting an exchange student from the Netherlands this year, and I asked her why she would want to spend an extra year taking high school classes in the United States instead of just going straight to college in her country. She said, well, American high school is easy, and I wasn't ready to go to college. I asked her if it was a little bit more difficult, though, because she's taking classes in her second language. She said, this is my third, and I don't even have to try to pass my classes. Well, that was kind of funny. It was mostly upsetting because I didn't know that other countries openly mocked our educational shortcomings. And I think it's sad that when the average American high schooler graduates, they're only fluent in English. Because most school districts don't offer foreign language classes until middle school or even high school, way after the mind is best prepared to retain another language. When we think about the fallacies in our education system, we must first divide it into the levels of dereliction. First, there's the country as a whole, then each state, and then each school district. The United States needs to standardize the curriculum from state to state. Third graders in Texas should be learning the exact same things as third graders everywhere else. Schools throughout the country need to be preparing students equally, and that means the government must regulate the ideas that are being passed on to impressionable minds. Some schools refuse to debunk flat earthers or those who deny evolution for religious reasons, and I am all for religious freedom, but scientific ideas such as climate change or evolution that are widely accepted by most people in the scientific community need to be taught. There is proof of evolution. There is proof of climate change. Schools shouldn't be allowed to skirt around these issues because they are afraid of offending a few people. Standardizing the curriculum and the testing from state to state would make statistics like those of Louisiana less common. There is no doubt that public schools from one city to another, even within the same state, greatly differ in the availability of resources. Schools draw their funding from federal, state, and local taxes. Emphasis on the local. More than half of the funding for each school comes from local property taxes. So if all the rich people live together on one side of the city, pay taxes to their county, then their schools will have more money for paying their teachers and buying school supplies. And all of the poorer people in the less affluent neighborhoods will have less availability of resources and therefore worse schools. I propose that each state equalizes the amount of funding that each school district gets. And now that each school is receiving the same amount of money to offset the education disparity between the highest and lowest tax brackets, what can each school district itself do to better the education of its students? Many of you probably aren't thinking, remove the dress code, but that's what I'm thinking. Have you all heard of rape culture? Rape culture is the normalization of violence against women, and it is perpetuated through the use of misogynistic language and the objectification of women's bodies. Victim blaming also factors into this. Telling a girl that her shoulders are distracting to a male classmate, sending her out of the room and therefore interrupting her education to change clothes, and socializing other students to hold a girl accountable for a boy's actions upholds rape culture. You're probably thinking that's an overreaction. Well, the younger that kids are taught about consent and bodily autonomy, the more likely they are to grow up and teach others the same. Instead of punishing little Sarah for wearing a tank top when it's 95 degrees outside, call out little Johnny for staring at her shoulders instead of learning how to long divide. I am fortunate enough to attend a private school, and we don't have a dress code. Girls wear crop tops in every day, and that does not affect anyone's education at all. I have gone to public schools all over 5 different states until about 8th grade, and I've seen both sides, and the difference in not only the education that we were receiving, but also just the way that students are treated is shocking. I spent some grade levels across multiple states. I learned about the Revolutionary War 8 times and the Civil War 5. Part of the problem is that kids are being forced to learn about the same whitewashed version of events every year. They never learn about other cultures or anything more recent than World War II, really. I think that every state needs to have standard curriculum because Texas should not be allowed to remove the Trail of Tears from their textbooks or say that the Holocaust is a difference of opinion in their public schools. The leaders of the civil rights movement need the same amount of coursework as the founding fathers, and schools should be forced to acknowledge that many of their American heroes actually owned enslaved people. Furthermore, people should be concerned about the Eurocentrism of history lessons. I never learned about Africa until high school, and many public high schools never even talk about it. Our system is undeniably messed up, but it can be fixed. I am incredibly fortunate enough to go to a school where we learn through discussion instead of focusing on just memorization. And I want more kids, American kids, to be able to have the same opportunity. Now, let's think about the teachers. They are overworked and underpaid, forced to prepare us for standardized tests instead of making sure their students are actually learning. Just last March, teachers in Jefferson County demonstrated sick outs where they called in sick and effectively shut down public schools in that district because there was a lack of teachers to protest their compensation. Kids go home and spend hours on homework, most of which is just busy work. Classes are overcrowded and buildings are falling apart because government funding decreases every year. And let's talk about how a major incentive of young people joining the armed forces is the skyrocketing cost of higher education. We need the people in charge of public schools to actually care about the kids, students. Fuck Betsy DeVos and all of the others who have never attended public education and continue to defund it. Schools deserve more funding, teachers deserve higher pay, and education should be first and foremost. It is the foundation of our society, and yet no one with the power to fix it wants to. The role of the Department of Education should be to advance education equality and civil student rights. If these goals were being met, the phrase school to prison pipeline wouldn't be so familiar to you. At KYA last year, I heard a bill being demonstrated about requiring all school resource officers, cops, to wear body cameras at school to prevent the disproportionate abuse of violence on students of color. Most people seem to agree with the bill, but they didn't question why cops were in schools in the first place. Students should not be criminalized for behaviors that can be resolved by the administration. And the school to prison pipeline is greatly strengthened by the presence of school resource officers in schools because there are a higher number of in-school arrests, often for non-violent behaviors. The recent increase in zero-tolerance policies and the emphasis on standardized test scores has led to higher rates of disengagement and dropouts from low-performing students because they don't have access to resources that are more common in more affluent school districts. Getting rid of the school resource officers will not overall impact the safety of schools, but it will help students feel more secure in their place of learning. The likelihood of a school resource officer being able to actually stop an active shooter is very, very low. And if students' needs were being met educationally and emotionally in a society that aimed to reduce toxic masculinity, school shootings would be less common. Students shouldn't be treated as suspects, distrusted, and alienated. If you treat every less fortunate high schooler like a criminal, they aren't going to try to defy those stereotypes because they think they're already stuck in that system. The base has to be solid for anything worth building to actually be built. The equality of resources and the standardization of curriculum will attempt to end the disparate conditions between the likelihood of a student attending college after graduating from high school. The problem starts way before high school, but it doesn't stop after high school graduation. There is not a single state in the United States where someone working a full-time minimum wage job can support themselves. Most jobs that pay well enough to achieve a livable standard require a college degree, but the cost of that degree is skyrocketing. I am a senior in high school, and I am terrified. The cost of the tuition for my dream school is around $70,000 a year. And there's no way I could afford that. Professional society treats a college degree as a necessity, but prices it as a luxury. I don't want to spend the rest of my life in debt trying to pay off my student loans. And yes, there are scholarships, but I think the average student is just as entitled to a higher education as an extraordinary one. Nowhere in Europe does higher education cost so much. We all deserve the chance to better ourselves, and just applying to these schools breaks the bank these days. I applied to 11 schools, which is about normal for an ambitious student looking to leave their home state. And each application was $60. On top of that, you have to pay each time you send a school an ACT or SAT score report. People tell me that if I wanted to save money, I could just go to a state school. But the thing is, I know that is not the learning environment for me. All the schools I applied to are small liberal arts colleges with really tiny class sizes and no graduate students to compete for research opportunities against. I could spend less money by just going to U of L, but I don't want to be a number sitting in the back of a giant lecture hall. At this point, I am just paying a lot of money to be rejected by schools that would provide the type of learning environment where I'd succeed. Thank you.